if I had a podcast, it would be on figuring out the meaning of life.
Yeah.
I'd do a podcast on death. Then I was like, well, shit, I'm going to do a podcast on death. And that's how it started.
Podcast Junkies, episode 161. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. But if this is not a welcome back and this is a welcome and you're new to the show, in case you're wondering what it is, it's an interview with an amazing podcast guest, which typically happens every single week, or someone who is a luminary in the podcasting space. Last week was no different in case you missed it. Shell Hamilton, host of the popular Meditation Minis. Fantastic person, human being. And for someone who didn't even think she was going to start a podcast about meditation, she hit over 5 million downloads. She's just a really good person. We reconnected at Podcast Movement, podcastjunkies.com/161 for the full show notes and to listen to that episode. This week, we touch on the subject of dying, but from a different perspective, not what you would think. It's not a macabre episode at all. The host, D.S. Moss, host of the Adventures of Memento Mori, which means remember to die, talks about the process he took in formulating the show. It talks about the idea of dying in his very first episode. We mentioned advanced directives and why it's important you should have one. Whether or not it was important for him to have a personal connection to the topics is something we talked about, and he gives us his opinion on that. He was actually named Best Podcast of 2017 by The Atlantic, so that was cool. We touched on that a little bit. He talks about the research, the shows he was listening to when he came up with the idea for the podcast. And there's a group of his friends who actually thought he was getting too personal with this show, so we touched on that a little bit. Now, the other thing you should take personally is your podcast host. And one of the great supporters of this show for a while now has been Podbean. Head on over to podbean.com/podcastjunkies. They have plans starting at $9 for unlimited podcast hosting. They have their own app as well. It's rock solid podcast hosting. There's only a handful of hosts that I recommend, and definitely Podbean is one of them. They're friends of the show, and you'll see them at all the podcast conferences. I'm good friends with Jennifer and with Vernon of Team Podbean, and they'll definitely go out of your way to make sure you have a pleasant experience. If you have any challenges or you have any questions about getting set up, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Harry at Podcast Junkies. But to sign up, podbean.com/podcastjunkies. Make sure you stay to the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. If you don't know what that is, it's a little Easter egg at the end. I give you the hashtag, you post it on Twitter, and you tag the guest, and you tag me. It's kind of fun, right? For now, no need to worry about that. Focus on this interview coming up with D.S. Moss. Very interesting. So D.S. Moss, host of the Adventures of Memento Mori. Thank you for joining us on Podcast Junkies.
Thank you for having me.
So I've been doing this show for almost, in April, it'll be 4 years. And in the beginning, I would try to reach out to just folks that I met at conferences because I wanted to get a feel for people because I just don't like cold conversations. And you can kind of tell, I don't know if you've had this before or experienced it, where you have a conversation or you hear people having a conversation, you can tell that they've never met. And but as the show has grown, have people reaching out, and so Maggie reached out on your behalf, and I listened to the show, and I was really impressed with the production. So I thought this would make for a good conversation. So I'm happy we were able to connect.
Yeah, thanks. I think I reached out to you. Boy, I want to say like a year ago.
Yeah, I did see something in the history. And I think I replied back because you wrote a really nice note, and most people don't take the time to be conscientious about that. So was that a plan for you to just kind of put some thought into the notes you were reaching out? Because a lot of people, they do mass emails and then they don't even change the name right sometimes. So it's like, dear first name. And I'm like, okay, you're just form lettering this.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's a form letter, but yeah, I wanted to be on your show, and so I thought it would, that the least I could do was to write an introduction of who I was, what the show is about. And I think, it's kind of a tangent, but I went to a Christmas Eve party.
Okay.
And there were like 20 people that RSVP'd, and I was the only one that showed up.
Oh my God.
And when it was, yeah, it wasn't my party, but, so there's just the conversation was about like, our social graces are a thing of the past, right?
Yeah.
RSVP means RSVP. I mean, that's like party
Faux
nightmares.
pas, yeah.
When no one shows up. Oh, yeah,
This is just a couple days ago
yeah.
then.
Just a couple days ago,
Oh wow, that you must have felt bad for the host.
I did, and they were, they're dear friends of mine, and this is a traditional party.
Mm-hmm.
So there's usually like a crew that goes. And to be fair, there were like stragglers that came in, a couple hours late. But
Yeah.
anyway, I guess the point is that I still try to adhere to
Social
traditional
graces.
standards of social graces for what it's worth.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the show, and if this is like, how is this, what other production you've done leading up to the show, and if you've tried other shows and this is the format that you landed upon, or I wonder how many iterations you went through before you decided on this theme. And for the and for the benefit of the listener as well, just to provide some context, if you could tell how you would describe the theme of your show, because I think it's better if it comes out of your mouth as opposed to me trying to describe, because I think it's really interesting.
Yes, it's a tough sell sometimes. So the show is about death, but specifically, really, it's about life. Mm-hmm. So the premise is that if I could reconcile my own mortality, then I could, in fact, live a more meaningful and purposeful life.
Yeah.
And so I explore this through the lens of death, through all kind of aspects of it, the science, the mysticism, the culture around death. And so that's what the show is about. We go into topics anywhere from communicating with the dead to ego death and ayahuasca to your digital afterlife. So it's interesting because when I always lead with that. The show is about death because I always like to get people's reactions. But it's about life, and it's not about necessarily about the act of dying.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily just around that very finite stage of going from this existence into non-existence.
Yeah.
And about like funerals, and that's certainly a part of it in some ways, but it's more about the hereafter. It's mm-hmm. about the worm at the core, the root of how the fear of death influences everything that we do. And anyway, so it started off as a little bit of a lark, really.
Mm.
I have a production company, and we do videos, specifically ethnographic marketing videos for big brands. And my sound designer, who I often use, we became friends. And one day over beer, I was like, "Hey, how about we do a passion project?" Yeah. And he's like, "Yeah, let's do a passion project." And then I'm like, "It's going to be about death." And he's like, "Oh, okay."
He's like, "Bummer."
And he's like, "Oh man." No, he's pretty stoked. And to go back even further into the reason behind the show is there was no instance where like I started questioning existence. Well, I think I was born questioning mm-hmm. existence. So that's kind of everything that I've ever done has had this theme in it one way or the other. But someone had asked me if I had a podcast, what would it be on? And then I was like, well, fuck, I'm not really an expert in anything. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not a comedian. I'm not an expert in anything. What could I possibly talk about that people would want to listen to? And then at the time, my background's in film. At the time, I was writing a script about this 28-year-old millennial who was going through a quarter-life crisis, and I was, it was a comedy, but I was reading all of these existential writers whom I'd read in college. I think mm-hmm. most of us go through this phase. But it was like Camus and Sartre and these stacks of the meaning of life, and I had all these sticky notes on my desk in front of me of like angst and dread and shadow and Jungian archetypes. And I was like, oh, if I had a podcast, it would be on figuring out the meaning of life.
Yeah,
I'd do a podcast on death. Then I was like, well, shit, I'm going to do a podcast on death. And that's how it started, really. My background is I have a degree in film with an emphasis on screenwriting. So, as you probably could tell, it's fairly heavily scripted.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not scripted in the sense that it's not real life, but it's there is a narrative to the show.
Was the plan always to have to cap it? It seems like it's capped right now at 14.
Yeah, because that's just TV season.
Yeah.
I think it's only 14 because there was technically it's 12. There's two parters.
Yeah.
I like to keep it right around like 27 to 30 minutes per episode.
Mm-hmm. Is the idea to extend it to a new season?
Yeah, working on season 2 right now.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the planning process. Did you have the idea of for what the 14 would, or the 12 would be like when you started, or were you kind of like thinking about it as you went along?
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of lessons learned in like distribution of the show, but the idea is that one episode would lead to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, as I wanted to keep it as much as like a true journey as possible, but that's being a little bit romantic. So
Yeah.
you have to do a little bit of planning. So in part, there was a little bit of organic flow to it, but then there was also we needed to figure out how it was going to end, and so I definitely didn't write one until the previous one was out, just so I kind of had a feel for connecting it to make it feel like an actual TV season.
Yeah.
But as you know, that when you publish on a certain day, you need to publish on that certain day, and so I started like lapsing. There was like up to, I think at one point there was like almost like a month and a half gap between episodes, just because I didn't realize how much work it was going to be.
Yeah. There's actually a term called pod fading, and most people, they make it to about episode 7 and they realize how much work it is, and then they stop.
Pod fading, yeah. I think mine was at 3.
So I'm wondering a couple of questions. So what your friends thought as they started to find out about it? Did they start to get worried, or
my friends have been worried for decades, so that's nothing new. I think my mom, yes.
Yeah.
My mom's worried. I think she's actually in the first episode. I don't think she's listened to any of the other episodes.
Okay. Yeah, you talked about the. I think that's when I heard the one where you plan the plan on dying, and I think one of the comments was if you something to the idea of spending, you should spend as much time living your life as opposed to thinking about your death. It was something along those lines.
Yeah, that's from my life coach Devin. Yeah, my name is Devin, and I have a life coach named Devin too. Okay. So that's a little bit of into my narcissistic psyche, I guess. But but yeah, I think once people listen to the show,
yeah,
I mean it's very much me anyway. But once people listen to the show, they realize that it's not a dark conversation at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably, I tell people you'll laugh more than you'll cry. I promise you.
It's an important conversation to have, especially the first one about plan. I think the fact that people squirm a little when you bring up the subject just speaks to this idea of people not being prepared for that conversation, and I think you bring that up to the forefront is important, and I'm wondering if that's some of the feedback you also received with that first episode.
Yeah, that first episode in particular is the one that I get the most thank you for sharing that information, because it's, yeah, and I don't know, I think we tend to say Western culture shies away from this topic. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I know that some people in America don't shy away from it and talk about it, but a lot of families ignore it. And I didn't even go into it with the mission to be like, hey, let me give this information so people can start preparing for dying. It was more about me, but that's certainly one of the comments that I got back about the first one is even doing advanced directives. There's like no reason why everybody shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's a simple piece of paper. And so just for the audience, if you don't know, an advance directive is that legal piece of paper that says when you authorize the plug to be quote unquote pulled. And so it's important that we all have a say in how things shake out, really. And I even have like neighbors that have children that don't have guardianship of their kids. You know, and I get why you don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty important to think about.
Did you find that it changed the way you with all these topics, and it was important for you to have like a personal connection to each one of the topics to dig into it?
Yeah, I wanted to experience all the topics genuinely and organically. So there are, you know, I'm tons of topics that we could discuss about death, right? So we didn't go into grieving,
okay,
necessarily, because I wanted to be grieving to talk about grieving, if that makes sense.
Interesting, yeah.
So I wanted it to come from my perspective, and this is what's important to an angle of the show, which if I do, it's rarely. I make an effort never to say you,
okay, because
I don't want to come across. I'm not an expert.
Yeah,
I'm stubbing my toes learning about this stuff, and so I don't want to come across as preachy at all, or telling people what the right thing to do, or giving advice. This is so the intent is like, hopefully someone can get some information about what I'm doing for myself.
Yeah.
And maybe you can apply that, maybe not. Maybe you're just entertained, or maybe you're just interested. But I don't think this is a topic where anybody's really an expert in. And so it's important to me that the audience understands that I'm just learning. I'm just trying to learn. And hopefully they can get something out of it that I got out of it.
I get the sense he's just reporting from the field.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm interested in you know, towards the end, you also talked about psychedelic ego death, and you touch on ayahuasca. So I imagine that's directly related to experiences you've had as well, and I've done plant medicine as well, so that's why it's of interest to me, and what your experiences were in putting those two episodes together.
The Plan on Dying, where I actually do all my logistics and admin stuff, that's the first one. The Psychedelic Ego Death, where I go to Peru and do ayahuasca in the hopes of transcendence through white light ego death. That's the season 1 finale.
Yeah,
two-parter.
You could have left it as a cliffhanger. And
I kind of did leave a little bit of a cliffhanger for season 2, or at least.
Like, I'm going in. Here we go, guys, and then end the episode right there.
Yeah, with a scream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was in October, to a place called Temple of the Way of Light, and Devin, who was actually the life coach in episode 1, who's also a plant medicine coach as well.
Okay.
There's coaches for everything these days, right?
Yeah, totally. I didn't realize I thought they were called shamans, but I guess that's different. So
no, well, that's the guy.
Yeah.
There's a coach that can actually just prep you on.
That's interesting. You're some sort of Sherpa.
Yeah. So that's
makes sense.
So he got me ready to go. I will say, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I will say that I did not. My ego is still around.
Well, I think it's just, my experience has been that you're just more aware of it, and it sort of colors your perception of day to day, and you can put it in different contexts, and depending on how profound of an experience you have, there's definitely an increased appreciation for the universality of love, for example.
Yeah, I had in my 5th ceremony, we did 7 ceremonies in like 12 days. My 5th ceremony was that blissful,
the heart opening,
the heart opening. Holy moly! Yeah, which is pretty amazing. So ayahuasca is what you've done as well?
Yeah, through a group. It's through the Santo Daime community, which is which we're connected to here in Los Angeles. But yeah, we were obviously, you have to be introduced and all that sort of stuff. That we were connected in New York, and we've been able to reconnect here in LA.
So you do it. How often do you do it?
Probably once every couple months.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow. Do you go like one ceremony at a time, or do you like double up?
Yeah, no, it's one at a time. Yeah. So, yeah, it's been interesting. It's just definitely, it's just, you have to apply it too. You can't just do it and everything's going to be, you have to kind of take the lessons and then you have to actually do something with it, I think, before you can actually get any value from like a second trip or third trip. Yeah,
it's not a quick fix for anything.
No.
I think a lot of people think like, I'm going to do ayahuasca and then I think maybe I was that person. I'm going to transcend.
Yeah, I think everyone who went before their first one, I think that's definitely on their mind. Yeah.
So that's not, you're absolutely right. You gotta actually, make it a part of your existence. You know it was interesting, and I'm still not quite, I'm not quite over this, is I immediately when I got back, because I was also in the jungle,
mm-hmm.
I was really bothered by consumerism.
Oh yeah.
And it would, like, as we all should be.
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe I was, and still I have a problem with waste, like throwing things away, even like food and again, like something we all should be aware of, but I'm like it emotionally bothers me post ayahuasca.
Yeah, I think you just become more conscious of it. It's always there and probably worse than we've ever seen it. And I think it's just the fact that you had that heart opening experience. I think it just makes you more sort of like the aperture of the lens is open now and you're more observant and cognizant of it.
Yeah.
So what's the response been overall to the show?
It's been great. It's been pretty positive. I'm actually pretty stoked. We just got, as last Thursday, the Atlantic rated us 31 out of the top 50 podcasts of 2017.
That's great. Congrats.
Yeah, like 10 above Pod Save America. I don't know.
was that the goal to top?
yeah, that's the goal. And that's like so we're 31, and then 99% invisible is 30. So I just been
that's pretty good. That's pretty good company.
It's great. It's great company. I was kind of blown away. And it happened because I wasn't expecting it, and so when I saw it, I was just flipping through. I thought maybe there was a chance, and so I got past I guess Pod Save America was like 43 or something out of 50.
Did they count down backwards?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then once I saw, I don't know why I keep on referencing Pod Save America. I mean, I like it, but I was like, oh, well, I'm not on here.
Yeah.
And then it was like revisionist histories. Like there's no way I'm going to get a higher rating than Malcolm Gladwell. And then, so, sort of like curious and half disgruntled. And I'm just, because it's on this is why I'm doing this motion, because it was on my phone.
Yeah.
And then I saw 31, and I think to be honest, I think I cried a little bit.
I'm sure.
I think I ran around the room.
You did a Macaulay Culkin around the room?
I did a Macaulay Culkin. And then I was talking to a friend later in the day, and I'm like, I think I actually forgot what good news felt like.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. That could have been the only time in my life I've had good news. I don't know. Like unexpected, like almost lottery ticket winning excitement.
It's interesting because as creators, there's a part of us that always wants a little bit of recognition for the work we do. And I think, for podcasting, there's nothing like appearing in a chart or just having someone mention it, or, I still get goosebumps when I hear some of my friends mention the show. I was listening to Harry, and then it's like, the old days of the radio, you heard your name called out, the DJ called your name and something like that. So you're like,
yeah. Making a request to that girl that you liked in 7th grade.
Yeah, yes. This goes out.
Did you remember that? Did you ever do that?
Yeah.
Requests?
I'm 47, so I remember the days of radio and
calling in for a couple of
couple of songs. It's so funny because you would figure out the formula because then they would, they had it all figured out and they would record you and they would play it in. You're like, oh man, they're playing that song just for me. And, but it was fun to hear. Never, nonetheless, and now when you hear it, I'm always tweeting people. I'm like, thanks, and I tag them because I think for podcasters especially, I really tell people that I'm just trying to grow my listenership one at a time. I like the fact knowing who's listening to the show. Would I love to have like 100,000 listeners or 1 million listeners? Yes, obviously. If you're looking to monetize, and I don't have a specific need to do that, but I think there's some power in just building these communities, and I have a Facebook group, so I know like specific people that are listening to the show, and I even have super fans that listen. I put a little retention hashtag at the end of each episode, so I know like they have to tweet about it. So that means they have to listen to the end. So if you see one when we promote this episode, it's just something that I make up to see who's paying attention, and they tweet about it. And I'm like, oh, okay, you listened to the end. That's
so great. Yeah, it is nice. And so how many episodes have you done now?
I just released 154.
Wow.
154, yeah.
Over 4 years.
Yeah, 3.5 years. Just had a couple of bigger podcasters on, and by the time this is out, I will have released my episode with, of all people, the former CEO of Groupon, Andrew Mason, because he's starting a new transcription editing tool called Descript, where he's allowing you to, through the front end of the tool, he'll do the transcription of the audio. When you edit the audio, it edits the WAV file. So he's trying to move.
Really?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And he's got like $5 million in funding. Obviously, they're going to let him play around and see if you can have a go at this. But again, through the website, someone reached out and they said, are you interested in speaking to Andrew Mason? I'm like, yeah. I'll talk to the former CEO of Groupon. And we had a great conversation. He's a really nice guy.
That'd be awesome to have the WAV file, especially just get all the ums out. Can you get all the ums out?
Yeah. I find and replace, right? Yeah, it's so funny. You do enough editing, you know what the waveform looks like. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I mean, luckily I don't. Luckily, I don't do the editing, so I don't.
Yeah, I haven't done mine in a while as well. But I remember I occasionally jump in because I get a little excited, and I'm thinking I'm going to do like this great interactive episode. I just had one woman on, and we were talking about old school hip hop, and I was like, man, maybe I should sample in some of the songs, and she mentions it and fade in, and so I may do that as a bonus or something like that if I get the urge, because I have fun. I mean, when I was editing, and I grew up DJing, and then I did electronic music production, so I love playing around with the audio. It's just I don't have the time for it anymore.
Yeah,
but it's really fun, and I imagine that's part of the allure for you, just building this whole sonic landscape.
Yeah, it's and I have have a good workflow with my sound producer. So I do the interviews and then do a paper edit, get them all transcribed, and then I actually the template that I use for the show is I literally took a few episodes of Freakonomics.
Okay.
And I just overlaid my show on top of the Freakonomics formula.
Yeah.
And it works great. So
well, that's interesting, because that's something that's very common. Like for electronic music production, they usually have you dissect a track that you like, and you're like, okay, here's the drum, here's the bass line, here's the hi-hats, here's the snares, and you just overlay it, and you're like, so that's how that sound is made.
Yeah.
So it's very similar.
Yeah, I love Freakonomics. I actually emailed Stephen Dubner and asked him if he'd be my mentor.
What do you say?
And he's like, I don't got that type of time. Well, I don't even know what the fuck you mean, but I'm a busy man.
Yeah. So have you been able to meet some of your podcasting heroes as a result of the show?
Not yet. I think the list on Thursday was the closest that I've gotten so far.
Yeah.
I live in the same neighborhood as Jad from Radiolab.
Okay.
So I see him at the bodega every once in a while, but I haven't got the nerve.
That's funny. You got to figure out a way to casually stalk him.
Yeah.
Have your podcast playing out loud or something like that. Or something.
Yeah.
Or his. So there's probably a way to do that.
I haven't listened to his new. Have you listened to his new one? The one about the Supreme Court?
No, not yet. You could do a podcast meetup as well. That's always good to get local folks in the same room. We do. There's an LA meetup, and I've been trying to I didn't start it, but I think that might be a good opportunity because, I think just with community and podcasting, I don't know what your experience has been, but like when we go to the conferences, there's a big one called Podcast Movement. There's Third Coast. There's a new one, a couple in Florida coming up. And the community is so open, and they're willing to help. And it's been a really great experience. And I'm wondering if you've had that experience as the show has grown and you've found other podcasters.
It's also interesting too, because I live in New York, and so there is just media in general. Mm-hmm. There sometimes can be conglomerates, right? So my streets, living directly across from me, is a friend of mine, Angela Ledgerwood, and she has a pod called Lit Up,
okay,
where she interviews authors, and then behind me was she doesn't live there anymore. She moved to Atlanta, but Julia Baybridge, she hosts a podcast called The Lonely Hour.
Okay.
And then down the street, about 4 houses, is Torre, who he has several different podcasts. I think there was somebody else. And so there just seemed to be just like a concentration.
You could do a meetup just on your block.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, Gimlet, because in the early days, I approached Gimlet and Pineapple, Radiotopia, just to see if they wanted to produce the show.
Yeah.
And all they said no. Even they have been pretty generous with their responses. So there is that feeling that they're just good people. Even like I know when I talked about Stephen Dubner, like he did email me back.
Yeah.
Even though he's like, I don't got time for that. But there's that sense of
there's that sense that he's not so far disconnected from the podcasting world that he's got like somebody now answering his emails, and so that's sort of refreshing to know.
Yeah, and I think just because I haven't gone to any of the festivals or the conferences yet, because it always feels like, and maybe it's just my personality. It just always feels like I'm chasing time, chasing to get things done, and I just seem to miss them for one reason or the other.
Yeah, I found for me the benefit in the beginning. There was some interesting stuff, takeaways. The biggest one is Podcast Movement. It's about 2,000 folks now, but I think now for me it's literally like networking and reconnecting. And that this past year was the 4th year. Next year is going to be Philadelphia. It's going to be the 5th year, and I've gone every year, and I just keep growing like. Because essentially that's where I get my guests from, because it's a podcast about podcasting. So I get to meet people, have a beer with them, and I'm like, oh, I got to have this person on. So it's really fun opportunity for me. And then every year I make T-shirts. So now I'm known for the bright. The logo's bright yellow, so it's a bright yellow with black writing. That's the podcast artwork. So I wear the shirt, and then I make like 100, and I just hand them out. And so by the time I'm done, I'd have handed out all of them. And then I asked people if they want the free shirt or the paid shirt, and they said, I want the free one. So, okay, you just got to subscribe to the show on the spot.
Oh, clever.
So just stuff like that. So, yeah, it's just, now I'm known for the shirts now. So every year now I got to like make sure I at least get 100 made. So I always like to give them to my guests too. So if we do run into each other, then you now qualify for a free Podcast Junkies t-shirt. So.
Is there a podcast hustle podcast? Is there a podcast about how to market your podcast?
Yeah. I did a post I think a year and a half ago about all the podcasts about podcasting, and I think it was at 20 or 30, and I just lost count. And I did a post on Medium, and people still reach out to me from that article, and they're like, hey, can you add my show? I now podcast about podcasting, and it's just like a bit of a rabbit hole, sort of like the spiral. But yeah, there's no shortage of stuff to talk about. And I think in the beginning I was thinking about Inside the Actor Studio and how you can just kind of get the inside scoop on the actor, and that was the thought about just jamming with the hosts. And again, we don't sometimes we don't even talk about podcasting because it's just fascinating, and I think it just paints a picture of all the different flavors and how people can have people that podcast about podcasting themselves, people like Pat Flynn and Cliff Ravenscraft have been doing it for like 10 years. And then, people who do storytelling podcasts. I just saw my friend, someone previous guest, Vanessa Lowe, host of Nocturne. I don't know if you've seen that show, but they have there's a small podcast network. They call it The Herd, HEARD. And it's about 6 or 7 shows, and I've had a couple of those hosts on there. So it's just a fascinating community. There's comedians that have been on as well, and I just love the fact that there's no one way to do podcasting. Everyone does it different ways, and we all learn a little bit from each other. So I think that's always fascinating to dig in and see how people like you do it, coming from that TV and background, and how much effort you put into like the content, because I think that's important. There's some people that wing it. Like I will probably put this whole conversation as is straight up, because I've had a lot of flubs happen on interviews, and the listeners actually like it. They're like, oh, okay, you don't all have to be perfect. And I'm like, I tell my listener like that, my show isn't perfect. And, you'll hear the dog barking, you'll hear the garbage truck outside sometimes. So, but it just paints a different flavor. So I'm wondering, you mentioned that you did have the Freakonomics one. Were there other shows that you were listening to at the time as you came up with the idea?
Boy, I would say at that time, this is like 2 years ago, which almost feels ancient in podcasting terms, right? Because back then there was the NPR-based shows. Serial had just started the second season, maybe. And so it was like WNYC. Mm-hmm. So you have Ira Glass, who that's the podcast idol. Yeah, of course. Yeah, if I ever see him at a bodega, I will talk to him. Maybe. What was that? So Serial, a lot of This American Life. Yeah. I was listening to S-Town during the second half of our season, mm-hmm. Which influenced me from the sense of just they did such a great job of creating the world and creating the psyche within the world. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I absolutely love about this medium is the ability without visuals, because it's almost a challenge, the ability without visuals to create another world. Yeah. And I absolutely love that.
Well, there's this sense of your hearing becoming augmented, because if you're just listening and it's almost like that, it's so immersive, and that's why when you listen with good headphones as well, and you really get the sense that you're really pulled into a story. And that's why audiobooks have always been really interesting for me, because sometimes you just feel like you get sucked in, and that's how it is with a good and well produced podcast, and it sort of like transports you for that period of time. And if it's done well, it's just something that the listeners look forward to, and they get to know your voice, and they get to know you, and then that's why you're consistent, and they look forward to it, and they sort of develop this relationship with you over episodes, and I think it's a fascinating thing that happens with podcasting, because I feel like the connection between the listener and the host is it could be just really short, and it's a I've been to conferences and people have come up to me because I wear the shirt and they're like, oh, I listened to your episode, and it's just nice, and I'm sure there's been people that have listened specifically to what you said, and it's just this feeling that you're not as disconnected from your audience, which I really, really like.
You made me think of something that was said as, I guess it was something negative about the show. So it was, this book group decided to do the podcast instead of a book 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever it was. And some dug it, but one of the main things that people said was that it got too personal. Hmm. And that's something to kind of what you were saying. That's something that just that happened naturally throughout the show, was that it became, the more I started, exploring the topic of death, it's hard not to make it personal. Yeah. And then so there was a certain point, I would think it was in like episode 4, where I get hypnotized and go back to my past lives. Hmm. And so it's really me getting hypnotized, and you're listening to my, subconscious mumbo jumbo. Like, nobody really likes listening to your fucking dream. Really. I mean, they're like, oh, I had a dream last night. You're like, I do.
It's never as, you can never recreate what it is you were actually experiencing, because a lot of times you can't even put words to what was going through your mind.
But I think it's important to what you're saying and about podcasting is that, like, you got to make it personal.
Yeah, I think so.
You got to make it personal. If not, then why do it? And this was actually something that I learned. One of the main lessons through this first season is that instead of being a little bit reserved when things get a little bit. I mean, it's not like too much. Well, I mean, it is a little bit of information. I mean, I'm doing psychedelics for crying out loud. So, and we're talking about meaning and purpose.
I think that's the type of stuff, DS, that people relate to, and the people who it's not for, they'll tune out. But the people who resonate with that, they almost go in deeper, and they just like, oh, this is like hitting home for me, and this is something that I'm going through now, and that's what you find sometimes. And I think the podcasts that have the most success, from my perspective, are the ones where a little bit about the host, and they get a little more personal, because we're just human beings, right? Trying to connect with other human beings on this planet and make meaningful connections. And I think when that happens sometimes with people that we've never met, it's just, and they speak to, there's just that feeling where like, wow, I feel like it's the right message for me at the right time. And you couldn't have predicted it. You couldn't have planned it. It's obviously, you didn't even know these people were out there, but there's something about the serendipity of you deciding to have this message at this time that's going to hit home, and it's probably resonated for folks already, and I think it's just going to continue to do that.
Yeah, it's been an awesome experience, I got to say. And it's interesting too that in the later episodes, so like one of the reasons why I went and did psychedelics and was trying to transcend ego is that there was a lot of my personal stuff tied into this idea of success and love and kind of the big things in the narrative that I'd been telling myself for so long. I just totally lost my point. No, I was going somewhere. Where I was going somewhere with that.
No, I was just talking about the idea of connecting. How you can make that one-on-one connection with someone because of what you're saying at the time is really resonating with them, and it's the right message that they needed to hear at that time.
I didn't know why I felt like I needed to set that up with that, because that just made me lose my train of thought. I've been tiling my bathroom floor, so I've been sucking.
Yeah, that's okay. Did you
glue fumes?
Did you grow up in Brooklyn?
No, I was born in a state called Idaho, and then we moved to Alaska, and then I went to high school in Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I joined the Marine Corps, and then bounced around the world for 5 years, and then went to college at the University of Texas. Lived in Austin for about 9 years, and then been in New York since end of 2009.
What's been your favorite place to live?
New York.
Yeah,
New York, but
something special about New York. Austin's nice too.
Austin's cool.
Yeah,
Austin's cool. It was the right place for me at that time. I don't know where else I would live now. That's the curse of New York.
Yeah.
Right? Did you feel like
it's so hard?
How did you feel when you left?
It's mainly the weather. My wife's Colombian, and it's just like we went through Hurricane Sandy, a couple of polar vortexes, and it was just like enough is enough. And we had some friends out here. We'd been coming to Coachella for a couple of years, and we're just like, okay, let's give it a shot. And I'm staring at palm trees right now. We just went on a nice 3-hour hike a couple of days ago, and it was like 70, 65 degree weather. So just
it's 18 degrees right now. It's like polar vortex, like number 5.
I remember those days. You would go outside and you would lose your breath. You'd like take a breath, and just when the wind would hit, you'd be like, oh, your snot freezes up. I don't miss that. I miss the energy. I mean, plain and simple is just the energy and the vibe. And there's nothing like Manhattan or Lower East Side or East Village on a Friday or Saturday night. It's just like electric. I just love it. I love it. I do miss that.
And it's even better during the Christmas break when like 75% of the people are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, New York is amazing when it's empty.
So how did you have a plan for how you're going to market the show when you started, and has that changed now that you're wrapping up the first season?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like throwing gum or spaghetti at the wall. I'm not sure what the analogy is. I made some significant missteps at the beginning trying to promote it. Mm-hmm. I actually spent a lot of money on PR, which did nothing.
Yeah. Lesson
learned. PR is just snake oil.
Well, I think, I don't know if it's the remnants of what you put in place earlier, but the 1-2 punch of your original email followed up by the PR is why we're talking now. So.
Oh yeah. So Maggie. Oh yeah. That's all coming together. So Maggie, who contacted you, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but she works for Spoke, which is a curator for Sirius FM.
Yeah.
And she was a fan of the show, and she was the one in charge of it's not called On Being, but
On Being with Krista Tippett.
She does shows like that.
Okay.
Or like being human. So her curation category is being human.
Got it.
And then the original point that I lost. Now it's all circling back.
So we're able to tie it all back. That's good.
So they actually had used snippets of the show for the segment about relationships.
Okay.
Which I thought was pretty fascinating, because it was really what not to do in relationships, but through a show on death, they were able to. It was very relationship heavy, which I guess sounds obvious when I say it out loud. But so anyway, so that tie a knot on that, and we'll move on. So Maggie just became a fan of the show.
Nice.
And she's like, "Hey, I have some extra time on my hands. Do you need help with anything?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely. Could you just start emailing journalists for me?"
Yeah. Could you email all those people that blew me off the first time?
Yeah. There's this one guy in particular who complimented me on my form letter, but that's as far as it got.
And you're like, is that a form letter compliment that he generates?
Yeah. He writes to everybody.
Magnificent prose. So that's good. So marketing, you've changed what you thought was originally going to work.
What was the question? I think there's just a lot of. I had the same conversation earlier today about. And someone had asked someone was getting advice about podcasting, and they wanted to know like distribution, and they wanted to know about how to grow listeners. Mm-hmm. I was like, I can tell you all that I know about publishing and distribution. Gaining listeners is, man, I don't think there is a formula. If there is, I'm not sure exactly what it's been. It's just keeping, it's because sometimes it's uncomfortable. You're like, I do the show. It sometimes feels awkward to talk about pumping the show up to other people. Yeah. It's just, I think, natural for a lot of people. So the marketing it just kind of stopped. I just wanted to actually do the show.
Yeah.
And not be too concerned about trying to grow. And then you made this point earlier, like I just kind of took it at one listener at a time. And then I stopped, and this may be a result of ayahuasca, I stopped caring.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I stopped caring in the sense of
monitoring, like day in, day out, like how many people are listening, or just
that can be addicting, can it be?
Stats.
Look at the stats. So that's and in regards to like sponsorship too. Stop caring about that. So I don't have sponsors. I don't care about sponsors. Yeah. I'm going to if the downloads get to a certain threshold that we have like written down, then we'll approach some people for exclusive sponsorship. But just because the topic's about death, I want it to fit. Like I don't know how many advertisers would want to touch that.
How many funeral homes you got knocking at your door?
Yeah, MailChimp. Send a newsletter. My grandma died. Yeah. So
have you started a community, like a Facebook group for fans of the show?
We have a Facebook group. So I got to be honest with you. I'm not on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so when it came to, I was kind of like curmudgeon the old man when it came to social media outside Instagram. I don't know why Instagram is the exception. And then what happens is when you want to promote something, then it just feels forced, and then it just feels overly promote-y, and I'm not natural in that space anyway. And so it just never. So the answer to the question is yes.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not that sticky.
Yeah, I think it's a matter. We could talk offline a little bit too, but I think some of the things we do for clients is just promote them. Just make sure the group is specifically for the fans of the show, and it's something I did with Podcast Junkies. It's called Podcast Junkies, pretty original, and it's just a way for me to always, you can set rules for the groups and say this is not a place for you to promote your stuff. I have reserved the right to kick out anyone I want, and it's just for fans of the show. And I feel like your episodes and your content lends itself well to sort of like this really deep dive on these episodes. Where we're like, okay, let's talk about what DS was talking about in episode 1, and I imagine be a whole thread of stuff that would be happening on that topic of prepping and plant medicines. Have your own thread, and I think there's this idea of building this community, and then eventually they just entertain themselves and then they answer their own questions, and you don't have to be in there in the beginning. I think you just got to like create the space for them, and I think allow them to just build a community there, and it's a nice way they spread the word and they become your biggest fans.
Yeah. I failed at that. Instagram has actually been fairly successful and engaging.
The other thing you could do, I don't know if you've done this, are audiograms, which are the snippets of audio. Yeah, those are pretty powerful too, because you get 30 seconds of audio in Instagram or Twitter, which is normally not where you hear some audio. So it's a great way to give people a sneak peek. And I think that's a nice way to find new listeners. Yeah.
Shout out to Memory Motel, who gave me certainly on a streak, but gave me the instructions on how to do that in After Effects.
A couple questions as we wrap up. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Something that I've changed my mind about recently. That's so good. Besides retiling my bathroom floor.
Could be on anything.
Something that I've changed my mind about. I will say, and this is actually part of something I'm going through right now through season 2. I'm currently doing an episode on only becoming closer to the relationship with meat that I eat, having been a sentient being, and I think by in part because it is a cult of personality, but I've changed my mind about hunting animals for food. Meaning, ultimately that is the most ethical way to eat meat if you're a meat eater.
Yeah, you can't hide that connection and the way the whole how it gets to where it's a sentient being and arrives on your plate. I think people skip a lot of that and they don't want to close their eyes and like I don't want to see that. But I think if you can, you have a newfound appreciation for what exactly is on your plate.
Yeah. And so I guess I say it with disclaimers. I'm not into like taking pictures. I'm not into like shooting mountain lions or certainly not elephants or like hunting for the sport of killing, but hunting as a means to feed yourself, particularly if you're a meat eater anyway. Like you said, if you're just picking it up from the grocery store.
Joe Rogan talks a lot about that as well.
I actually tried to get him on that episode.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe Rogan and Steve Rinella.
Yeah.
So Steve Rinella has a show called Meat Eater.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to get. So Steve, if you hear this, I'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah, sometimes you got to put the intention out in the universe and just have the vibration go out there. What's the most misunderstood thing about you?
Boy, there is this. So I'm 42. I am single. I've never been married. I have no children. I think that there's this misunderstanding that I am afraid of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a misunderstanding. I think there's I think with a lot of friends, particularly my mother, there's this idea that I'm not looking for a long-term relationship, and that is not true.
Yeah, everyone's on their own journey, and I've found a lot of people and friends I've met through the podcasting community that are not married and they're in their 60s, and he just as happy as can be. And I think it's just everyone's got their own DNA and what makes them tick and what makes them happy. And I think it's not for everyone. So I think but I think what's important for people to respect your decision, because ultimately you would think that you know best.
Yeah, I don't know best at all. I'm just, I know. Yeah. Somehow I just made that about my personal life.
Oh, that was top of mind. So a lot of times with these questions, you never know what the answer is going to be, but it's usually something that's been brewing in your subconscious.
Yeah, I had a long late Christmas night where there was like three of us that sat around the kitchen table and waxed poetically. People in their like 40 to 43 range. Mm-hmm. Some recently divorced. Some, talking about love.
Yeah,
and the narrative of love.
That's your next podcast.
Yeah. I am not. Well, maybe it could be interesting. I am actually okay. So I am. I don't know if this is too early to say that I am working on another podcast where it is a dating show.
Okay,
dating show.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's a game show.
Yeah, well, keep us apprised of that. So DS, thank you so much. Time flies by, but this has really been fun conversation. Like I said, I never know where they're going to go, and this was I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
What's the best
finally.
place? Yeah, finally. It only took 2 or 3 emails. So that's what they tell podcasters. You just got to keep trying, especially those big guests. Sometimes you hear about stories where they reached out 6, 7, 8 times and then finally they said yes. So I think every podcaster is nothing if not persistent. What's the best place for folks to connect with you and connect with the show?
Yeah, you can just go to remembertodie.com. That is remembertodie.com, and that is also the social handles. Instagram is at Remember to Die. Twitter, which then I think we just talked about earlier, we're not that great, but we certainly would love to say hi.
Yeah.
And then if you just want to email, it's just hello@thejonesco.com.
Well, I'm glad you did continue the outreach. I'm glad we were able to connect. I really like what you're doing with the show. I just love the different ways people can tell stories, and I think you've got a lot of history and your background is really lends itself well to this type of storytelling. So I'm excited to get caught up on the remaining of the episodes, and looking forward to season 2.
Thanks, Harry. You're awesome.
Thanks so much to DS for coming on the show. We were connected through someone from his team that reached out, and immediately I was fascinated by the subject of his podcast, and I listened to a few episodes, and as a result, it was the great conversation you just heard. podcastjunkies.com/161 for the full show notes. As always, we put a lot of love and care into the show notes, so please make sure you check that out. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. cedarsoil.com to listen to his amazing music and be inspired. Don't forget to support our episode sponsor. They're really doing a great thing by supporting the podcast community, Podbean, at podbean.com/podcastjunkies. Tune in next week for my conversation with Joe Pardo, host of The Business Podcast. You can't get a better SEO-friendly name than that. Joe Pardo is the creator of MapCon, really good friend for several years now. I really had a blast when I was there. You probably heard me mention it on a couple of different episodes. And some great guests, past guests like Karen Yankovic, Mary Nichols have come out of that as well. And some others I may be forgetting, and some others that are probably yet to come. But I'm looking forward to being there again this year. I'm actually speaking again, so that's going to be fun. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, podcastjunkies.com/8tools, with either the number or the letter 8tools, and sign up and to be placed on our newsletter list. Now, the retention hashtag that I mentioned is some initials. Now, we're going to do DSRTD. So DS for DS Moss, RTD for Remember to Die. So it's hashtag DSRTD, and you can tag DS Moss and the show at Remember to Die, all one word, on Twitter. And of course, we are always at podcast_junkies. Thanks so much for being patient with the haphazard release schedule. I've been traveling, have more travel coming up. By the time you hear this, I will be in San Diego. So if you are at Traffic and Conversion or Social Media Marketing World, then please hit me up on Facebook is usually the best way, or I'm on LinkedIn, or you can tweet at me at podcast_junkies. Looking forward to connecting with some friends and always making some new ones, and probably end up with a couple more guests as a result of the trip, as always is the case. Thanks for all you do for the show. Love you guys.